All right, here we are after some technical difficulties, but we're about to get this thing going. I told you a little bit about Mike and Tom and their organization and intro, but I'm gonna let them tell it themselves and hear from their own mouths. Tell us about someone to tell it to and what you guys do, and just so the audience knows from your mouth.
We'll start with a little bit of history. We began Someone to Tell It To 10 years ago. Our anniversary will be on January 1st, 2022. And we're really excited about that and are making plans now to be able to celebrate that throughout this, the rest of this year and into next year. The reason we started Someone to Tell It To is because we saw that there was a real epidemic of loneliness in the world. That today people are more connected technologically as we are right now, but the downside is that we have become more disconnected relationally and emotionally. And we basically wanted to do something about that.
Yeah.
Because we know that's a problem. We know that it's worldwide. We know that statistics show that over the last 40 or 50 years, they can document how many more people will say that they are lonely, that they don't have close relationships, that they don't have people that they can tell it to, and without judgment, without being told what they need to do, without trying to be fixed. And that's why we started Someone to Tell It to be able to help people get connected again, to be able to listen to their stories in a non-judgmental way, to encourage them, to reassure them, to show them how relationships can be.
Yeah.
And how important they are, and how healing being listened to, being heard, being known, how that makes such a huge difference.
Okay. I love that. And let's talk a little bit more about that exactly, and specifically loneliness. Right. So we're talking about fatherhood here, right? And when it comes to loneliness, not just amongst, you don't even have to be a father, but amongst men, right? I feel like, once I started talking about fatherhood, I got into these single dad groups, on Facebook, to just hear what men and fathers are talking about. And a lot of men are talking about how they're alone and they don't have people to talk to, and no one to share how they're feeling. So have you ever felt that way? You guys ever felt that way in fatherhood, that you don't really have anybody to talk to about the stresses you go through as a father?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've often said that Someone to Tell It To is kind of birthed out of pain and suffering and feeling as if in some ways we weren't measuring up. And it was essentially out of our relationship together. Michael and I just were dear friends, and Michael was serving as a mentor for me in my first position out of grad school. And it was not a good match for my personality, the job, and I ended up having to leave quickly and suddenly, and then kind of the pieces, all the dominoes started to fall in my life, and I ended up literally with my family. At that point, we had two small kids. We now have four, but living in the attic of my sister-in-law's home because we couldn't afford a place of our own, and it was about as bad as it can get. And I wrote a story about it, actually. We've been published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and it was my very first essay that was ever public, and I called it Uncovered. And it was all about this one example in particular where I was in my sister-in-law's attic. It was in the middle of summer. It was like over 100 degrees in the attic. Wow. And I didn't have a job. And my kids at that point, I think they were in daycare or something. And they came home at the end of the day, and I was just in a bad spot. I was really depressed and feeling very lonely. And my kids came home, and I remember I was laying on a mattress on the floor because that's all we had. And they came and they just started bouncing on the mattress along with me, and just literally just reminded me in that moment that they didn't care how much money was in our bank account, or they didn't care if I had a job. They just cared that they were being loved and cared for and supported. And they could see beyond all that external stuff. They cared about the relationship, which is the point I guess we're trying to make.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. So I've been there, right? I've been there feeling like, as the man, you have to be the provider, and if you're not providing adequately, up to your standards or what you can do, there's that feeling of like I'm not doing enough, and that depression can creep in, and that self-doubt. And then you have a moment like that where it's like it puts things into perspective. But it can also reoccur still. You can get to another stage of your life and, have that same feeling creep back in.
It
You know,
will
I,
occur.
has that happened for you?
Oh, absolutely. You had asked us prior to the call starting today just how we're doing, and this is a kind of a difficult month for us because, as you know, as a board member of Someone to Tell It To, we have our big annual event, and it happens every fall, and it's our first and only big public event of the year. We do so much of our work happens behind closed doors because we care about confidentiality, et cetera. But because we're a nonprofit, we have a big annual fundraiser meeting every year, and right now our signups are really lacking, and we don't have as many people attending as we'd like, and there's probably a lot of contributing factors with COVID, et cetera. But it definitely every year kind of brings out a lot of insecurities for us, things that we've thought we've overcome, because even now it's our ninth annual event. You would think by now some of the things that bother us in year number one, you would think, oh, you kind of moved on from that. But those same insecurities, they come out in a variety of ways, and they're going to be with us for throughout our lives. That's
Yeah.
the part of being human. But I think hopefully over time, there's ways to overcome those feelings in
Okay.
healthy ways.
So, Mike, I asked you when, Tom talked about insecurities, when it comes to raising your kids and all those things, like what kind of, have you had insecurities that you want to share some of the insecurities you had about fatherhood and how you've been combating those on your own?
Sure. My experience as a as a young and new father, I was in graduate school. And Tom was in graduate school too when he had his first two kids. I was in graduate school when I had my first two sons. I have three sons, and because I was going to school, my wife was the breadwinner. I wasn't bringing in any money. Um, and so when our son was born, our first son, my wife needed to go back to work after 6 weeks
Mm.
being off, and I was the sole caregiver. And I took my son to class with me every day, in a basket, and fed him. My wife was breastfeeding, but she would pump milk, at night, and we save that, and I would have that in a bottle for my son during the day until she came home again. And so I learned really kind of say baptism by fire. I just had to do what I had to do, to both get through my classes and care for my son, a baby, an infant, who was just 6 weeks old when I started taking him to class with me. And
That's crazy.
I did that for a whole semester. What it did, thankfully, the school I was at allowed that, didn't give me any problems with it. Two other fathers who were having their first babies did this, then followed my lead. I set a trend. They started bringing their babies to class. And so there was this kind of a neat atmosphere. And so I just had to learn very quickly how to compartmentalize, how to be organized, how to do everything that needed to be done, both for my son and for my schoolwork. Boy, that was, I'm happy not to have to ever repeat that again.
Yeah, I can
It
imagine.
was not easy, but I did that. Now, um, with our third son, he was born with and continues to have severe intellectual disability and autism. He does not talk. He is incontinent. He cannot walk unassisted. He's in a wheelchair 99% of the time. He cannot care for himself at all. For me, the bigger insecurities come from how do I parent him
Yeah.
and care for him and do it well. And that is for me, and I've written about that. One of my first books or stories that were published, also in Soup for the Soul, was a story called Fear, about how I pretty much nearly melted down one day because I was afraid about how if something would happen to my wife, who was a cancer survivor, and I was afraid that if she would die, that I could not do this on my own. And that insecurity was really, really very strong. And that comes back, and then every once in a while. And it's always, though, honestly, in the back of my mind. It's always there, hopefully way, way back, but it surfaces from time to time. How will I do this if I had to do this on my own? I don't know if I could.
Thanks for sharing that, man. I think that we all have these fears and insecurities as a parent. Tell me about how you are actively combating those fears. Like when those fears come up, what are you doing? How, like those things that you have to do to like get you back into the right space? Or are you ever in the right space?
Sometimes I speak for myself. In this case, I don't want to lump Tom into this one. He can join it if he wants, but I don't want to put him there. Sometimes I don't handle it well. In the story that I wrote about, I did not handle it well, and I took off from the house, took my son with me, because I somehow in my convoluted thinking, okay, I'm probably someday going to have to do this on my own. That was my fear. I'm going to do this on my own. So let's just start now. Let me see what I need to do. I took him. We drove in the car aimlessly for 5 hours. Just aimlessly drove, as I was trying to sort the very dark, very scary feelings that I had.
Wow.
I'll sort them out. So when those feelings do crop up, I've learned not to have to do that. That's not, that's a pretty dramatic thing to do, but to talk about them with my wife, talk about them. I certainly share those kinds of things with Tom, and to write about them. I've written many stories about life with my son. His name is Matthew. And in fact, literally yesterday, I read a commentary in the New York Times that I sent a comment to and got published by the New York Times about living with someone with disability. And so those kinds of things help me a lot, to be able to be vulnerable, to be able to put it out there, to be able it helps me, but also hope it helps other people who might be in similar situations, so that they know they're not alone.
Absolutely. What about you, Tommy? I'm not gonna let you creep out of this one.
You're good at that. I'll start with the things I think I do well. I'm pretty open. I'm just a vulnerable person by nature, and I kind of wear my emotions on my sleeve, especially with people I trust and people who are safe. So I can think of, I think in our first or second book, I don't remember which, I wrote a story called Home Tonight with a question mark. And in that story, I talked about how one day in particular, there were a lot of insecurities being brought up. And it started, I at that point was a part-time stay-at-home dad when we first started Someone to Tell To. My wife's an RN, nurse at Harrisburg Hospital in Pennsylvania. And she was kind of the breadwinner early on for Someone to Tell. When we started Someone to Tell To, we just didn't have the resources. And I remember there was just some comments that were being made periodically, but eventually we often have said, like, you get enough paper cuts and eventually you're bleeding all over the place, and there was just a lot of paper cuts, whether it's family members who would bring up the fact that I wasn't bringing in a whole lot of money, or I remember it seemed like an insignificant thing for those who were on the outside hearing the story. But one day when I was home with my kids part-time, I took the kids to the library, and it was in the middle of winter, and in our town, there's not a whole lot close by. And I took the kids to the library because it's the one thing I could do to get them out of the house.
Yeah.
And we're in the library, and at that point we had twin girls, and they were just mischievous at that point in time, and one of the girls like pulled a couple books off the shelf, and the whole like shelf just collapsed, literally the whole shelf, in the middle of the library. And this older grandma came up and said, you know, it sounds like you could really use a woman's touch here. Or something, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was kind of what she said, and that to me was that just confirmed a lot of the internal dialogue I was already dealing with or wrestling with.
Yeah.
And so the next day, Michael and I working together, as we often do, we'll take a long walk, and there's something about taking a long walk together where we can express all of the darker truths that are going on. Actually, they're not truths. All the darker lies
Yeah.
that maybe the truth. We need the truth to dispel those lies, and that's what we provide for each other. So, anyways, we went on a long walk, and I was able to just kind of express all of those feelings and some of these situations that were making me feel less than. And Michael was able to, quote unquote, talk me off the ledge, and remind me of my worth and my value. And so I think the thing that I really want people to hear today is we actually have matching tattoos. I don't know if you can see it, but it says, "I'm proud of you."
Yeah.
And Michael and I, early on, we went into a tattoo parlor on Michael's birthday, I suppose. And we went in and got matching tattoos. And this is with the late Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, handwriting. And it comes from a book that was written by a good friend of ours named Tim Madigan. And Tim had a dear friendship with Fred Rogers. And Tim, at that time in his life, was going through kind of a dark period. And he asked Fred if Fred would just be proud of him. And so in every correspondence Fred had with Tim, he would always remind him that Fred was proud of Tim.
Yeah.
And so in every email and every phone conversation, and that's kind of what Michael and I have done for each other. And so in those really dark and vulnerable places, we can dispel those lies by reminding each other that we're proud of each other. And how many men need to hear that message?
So many. And you had someone to tell it to, right?
Yeah.
Like when you were in that dark place, you were embodying what you guys are doing now, like having someone to tell it to. And a lot of men, I feel like they don't have someone to tell it to.
Yeah.
They don't feel like anybody's going to listen. Or also, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. Like, how are you? Because as I told you, I'm on these sites and these not these sites, but these groups on Facebook, and I'm hearing a lot of men talk, and people are giving advice. All right, people, they're posing questions to a group, and people are giving advice. And how do you know when you got the right person to tell it to, right? Because you could have somebody, you could be venting to someone, and they're giving you all this feedback, but it could potentially be the wrong feedback. So how do you know when you got the right person to tell it to?
That's a fantastic question. Before I'll try to answer that. Before I do, I just want to let you know, I'd be glad to show you my tattoo, but it's on a less public place in my body, so I don't want to do that on camera. So.
All right, I appreciate that.
Michael was a Sally and couldn't get it in a place that was recognizable.
That's awesome.
If you need to edit that out, you can go ahead and do so.
Absolutely not.
He delights in saying that. He's very happy to say that. Anyway, now I forgot the question. No, how do you know it's the right person? Oh wow,
such a good question.
That is a great question. The reason that I'm going to try to answer this, the reason that we know when it's not the right person is because of the way it feels. Because if we feel that we've been vulnerable with someone, we've been very open with someone about how we feel or what we've done or what we've said, and they respond by saying, I can't believe you did that. How could you have said that? Why didn't you do this or that? You know what I mean? When someone responds in a way that makes you feel ashamed,
Less than.
makes you feel less than, makes you feel as if you aren't measuring up, as if you don't know what you're doing, that's the person you learn not to be too vulnerable with.
Yeah.
So
Sadly, and then that you have to learn the hard way.
yeah, you never know. I mean, you really never know until you actually do it, until you open up to somebody, how they will respond and how it will make you feel.
Mm.
Maya Angelou, who we love and love to quote a lot, used to, would say that you may forget what a person says. You may forget what they do. I'm paraphrasing this, but you will never forget how they make you feel.
That quote's on the wall in my kitchen.
Okay, I don't know. I hope that was fairly close. Just pulling it out of the air like that.
Yeah,
but it's about how they make you feel. And there are those who can make you, help you to feel safe and okay, that you shared what you shared, and even okay that you did what you did, even if what you did was not always good.
Yeah.
But they don't make you feel ashamed. They make you feel loved and supported and encouraged and reassured no matter what. Now because somebody shames you or makes you feel bad, you're not going to open up again. You basically, that often slams the door shut.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't necessarily stop someone from doing something that may not be good.
Yeah.
It just kind of drives it underground. You just hide it, especially that person. And so it's someone with whom you can just say whatever. We call it, we've written about this. There's a chapter in our second book that is entitled Naked and Unashamed.
Mm-hmm.
It's being able to be emotionally, relationally naked with someone and not feel shamed or ashamed because of it. That they allow you to be seen very totally.
That's awesome. I love I loved your answer to that question, because it sounds like you're saying, like, the person that's going to judge you, if you're going to tell your story to someone, the person that's going to judge you for it and just try to feel like you're the problem and that they need to fix you and not be compassionate, that's the wrong person, right? Like I always feel when I'm talking to someone, if it's the right person, that they have a good balance of validating me and also challenging me, and giving me a say, and like you said, not making me feel ashamed of what I've done, but helping me through and walking me through evaluating it for myself, and challenging me in a healthy way.
Yeah, and liking it back to the Facebook group that you've mentioned, I think part of our issue with those types of platforms is that you can be very public, but you have no relationship with a lot of those people. Right. I mean, especially if it's a large group. And so how vulnerable do you want to be in a group like that? Because you'll see, just scroll the walls of social media and you'll see somebody puts something out really vulnerable and look at the responses that they get. It makes us oftentimes just sick to our stomach.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes it's very cliche, or it's not helpful, it's not supportive. And we always say it's not wrong to offer some wisdom and encouragement and maybe some direction at times, but do it within the context of a relationship. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a relationship with somebody, should we really be telling somebody else what to do? Mm-hmm. That's not fair. That's not appropriate. That just happens way too much in our society.
It's about building trust, and trust comes through relationships. And the more you can trust someone, the more open you will be, the more vulnerable you will be, knowing that you can be. And then when a person, if there is some, a way that they can gently or whatever challenge you or help you to maybe see something differently, um, that becomes much easier to do and to be successful or to happen, because there's a trust involved. You can trust the person, knowing that what they're saying, what they might be challenging you about or with, is coming from a place of relationship, a place of love, respect, and empathy.
Yeah. You guys are saying so many things, man, that I have like so many questions about. I love the content so far. And I want to get to the book as well. Like you talked about some of the things you wrote, and you guys got another book coming out.
We'll get there.
Yeah. I want to talk about that for sure. What I want to ask you is, I've heard sometimes, and I often say this myself, that I've read that vulnerability, you mentioned trust, and, I say to people that vulnerability precedes trust. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, because you mentioned when I asked you, how do you know if it's someone to tell it to? You said, Tom, he's like, you're not going to know until you share, and you figure out how you feel after that and how they respond. So what are your thoughts on vulnerability preceding trust?
Yeah, I think we'll come back to Maya Angelou again, and I remember in one of her memoirs, she had a very hard life, a very hard upbringing, and she became very insular, I think, for a long time, and rightly so, because she had been hurt so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember in one of her memoirs, she said, you have to trust and love one more time, and one more time, and one more time. And we would strongly encourage everybody, even if you've been hurt, and we all have at times, if you've shared something deeply personal and you've not gotten an appropriate response, a healthy response, you can't stop being vulnerable, because vulnerability is strength. I mean, that's what's going to keep you healthy. And so if you've been hurt, then you have to trust and love one more time. You have to keep putting yourself out there that there is somebody to tell it to. There is somebody out there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, maybe they share something deeply personal, they get hurt, and then they just go insular.
Yeah.
And they don't trust and love one more time. And therefore your loneliness is just so pervasive, and people can go to some really dark places.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to the example I shared early on about someone to tell to being birthed out of pain. I literally, this is exactly what happened to me. I was in this second floor attic at my sister-in-law's home, and I had some dear friends of mine, or at least I consider them dear friends, living on the same block as me. And I remember after I had written my story, those friends on my block had read about it and wondered, how come you never shared any of that stuff with us? And the truth was, I did try to share it, but they were not supportive, and they were not. Yeah. And as a result, I got hurt, even more hurt than I was already dealing with, as opposed to Michael's response, where I literally wrote this in the book, that he came and sat down at a bar next to me one night when I was like considering drinking myself into oblivion.
Yeah.
And he came and sat down at the bar stool next to me and just was supportive and non-judgmental, and just proud of me.
Yeah. I love that. Like you gotta love and trust like one more time and one more time, right? Like I was just talking to a group of people about this yesterday. I did a leadership workshop for a nonprofit yesterday, in the Baltimore area, and I'm sitting at a group of with table with a group of people, and we're practicing removing the armor, vulnerability, right, and asking each other questions, and I was talking about vulnerability preceding trust. And I'm like, we're talking about having a victim mentality and a victim mindset about when something bad happens to us or somebody, they mishandle that trust. And we're like, well, man, how could you do this to me? Right. And And I have to understand that going into any relationship that I'm taking a risk, right? If I'm going to trust you, if I'm going to be vulnerable with you, if I'm going to love you, um, I'm taking a risk. And there's always a risk that the person may not reciprocate. There's always a risk that the person may change their mind, or something may go on in their life, and they mishandle that trust and that love. And that's a risk that I take going into it. And I have to accept that, bad things happen. That's a part of life. But it can't stop me from keep going after it if it's something I really want, because it adds so much value. When you have the right person, it adds so much value.
Yeah, because the consequence of not being able to share, of not having someone to tell it to, not being vulnerable is much greater, much more painful, much more lonely, much more unhealthy.
Yeah.
That to go through it all, whatever it is, alone, we're not made to do that. We're made to, we believe we've been created or made to be in connection with one another, and that we're not, this is not a solitary journey. This life,
Yeah.
it's meant to be a communal one. And by not being vulnerable, by not sharing, by not trusting that someone cares, like it's a much tougher life.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something you said earlier also that I had a question about. Okay, so let's go back to when you were bringing your kid to class, right? And I feel like there's no rule book on how to be a dad, right? And how to go through certain things in life, but there's almost like a unspoken standard amongst people, like that there's things you should be doing or shouldn't be doing, right? And we can almost judge ourselves by these unspoken standards, these societal standards. So you're bringing your baby to class, and that almost set a precedent, like for other dads, that this is okay. Because I can imagine there's dads in that room that maybe were trying to figure out what they were going to do with their kid, and maybe struggling, like, what am I going to, I got to find a babysitter, I need somebody to watch. And then they saw you bring your kid to class, and like, this is okay. Um, are there any other, have there been areas in your lives as fathers where you felt like that this is how fathers should do something, and you were like, you know what, I'm going to do it different, where you almost like kind of set a different standard or start a new trend? Like, have you ever had that experience where you feel like, okay, I'm going to change the way I do this. This may not be traditional, but I'm doing it.
Yeah, I'll come back to what we've talked about already, is just this message of I'm proud of you. I think back to, every dad would connect with this, especially those who are listening who've been athletes. I was at my son's Little League game, I think a couple of years ago, and literally it was straight out of, if you've ever seen the movie A League of Their Own,
Mm-hmm.
where the famous line is, "There's no crying in baseball." Well, there was a young kid who was crying, and his dad, literally in front of everybody, was yelling that exact line. "There's no crying," and he was not. There was no kidding around. It was very serious, and it was reverberating, in the stands. And I think we've been in a culture where that's been at times viewed as that's what dads are supposed to be, is these strong-willed, strong personalities, top-down leaders who
Yeah.
are, directive and authoritative. And I think we're starting to see, and it's never quick enough in our minds, the shift towards, dads can be compassionate and empathetic. And so I think with our own kids, we've tried, and we're continually trying. We're imperfect, as we all are, but just trying to reshape that message to a message where our kids can never do anything to make us not proud of them.
Mm-hmm.
We're always going to be proud of them.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
Mike, I see you thinking over there heavy, Mike.
I think I was the dad. I tried to be the dad. I was the dad who was not the guy, the one in the stands yelling or screaming or swearing or, berating coaches or officials or even my sons. you know, I just never did that. And because I could see when observing other dads doing that, it's like it made me very uncomfortable. And like they're embarrassing themselves, they're embarrassing their child, their sons, and so I think I made a conscious decision that I wouldn't do that. And I think by taking by agreeing, not agreeing, by volunteering to take our first son to class with me, simply, I felt that was countercultural.
Yeah.
I think I was the first student in the school to have done something like that. And I only learned after the fact, well after the fact, about when I was probably around the time I was graduating, that there was some talk among the faculty. No one ever said anything to me, but I learned it much later. Some talk around the faculty. Well, is this going to somehow dilute the academic integrity by to have a baby in the classroom? Does this, they were of another generation. They were older, another generation, and that this wasn't something that was done. But I just felt it was time to be a father in a different way.
Yeah.
I wanted to be an equal partner in raising our children.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so I did my best. It was imperfect, but I did my best to be that as much of an equal partner as I could have been.
Thanks for sharing those. I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I think this might be a good segue into the book. The baseball story, about dads, saying there's no crying in baseball. I coach I help coach my son's football team, so you can see it. You see it a lot of that in football too, big, heavy, dads really on their sons. And one of the things I realize about myself, and I think, other fathers could probably relate, is that, when our kids are doing something in a very public space, it's like we think it's a reflection of us. We see it as a reflection of how we've parented, and in some ways it is, but we're thinking more about us than we are about the kid. And like, that's a reflection of me. And really, they're their own person, and that's separate. And, my son plays baseball and he plays catcher, but he's different than me. He's very emotional, highly emotional. Wears heart on sleeve. I'm more like internal. And he struck out. It was the third out of the inning, and he was embarrassed. He went back into the dugout. They were there for a while, and I'm like, all right, what's going on? I'm sitting in the stands. He's in the dugout. He's not coming out. I don't see him coming out with his catcher's gear on. And I go in there. He's like, he's not going. The coach is like, he said he's not going back out. And I'm like, immediately I went into like dad mode in the wrong way, right? And I'm like, what are you doing, man? Like, get your gear on, get back out there, let's go. He's like, I'm not going. Like, I can't make him go, But like, I noticed, I didn't realize it till afterwards that it was like, I was trying to be like, I'm like, you're making me look bad. Like, what are you doing? Like, get out there. And I was saying all the wrong things. I'm like, you're gonna let your team, you're just not gonna go out there. You're gonna let your team down, and and he, what he said to me? He said, "You're not helping." And I was like, oh shit. I was like, I'm not helping at all. And I had to take a step back and be like, man, it's not about me. If I would have listened, if I would have taken time to stop just trying to talk to him, tell him what to do, and I would have maybe listened to him, how he was feeling.
I think that's an important point you bring up, and it comes back to a question you had asked earlier. I think just sometimes being willing to just say we're sorry when we don't get it right, because inevitably as parents, we're human just like everybody else is human, and there's no manual on parenting. And so you're just, a lot of the time, it's just the school of hard knocks. You're just learning as you go, and you're not going to do it right every time. And as long as you can own it and apologize to your kids and try to do better next time, that's every human relationship.
Yeah. I definitely had to own it. I had and humbled me. I waited till the next day to calm down till everything. He ended up going back out in the game in the inning after, but I handled that completely wrong, and I had to apologize, and I had to listen to how he was feeling, and that's why I say it was a good segue into your guys' book that you got coming out, because I needed to listen. That was a moment where I should have been listening. And have you decided on the title for the book? Tell us. I know you guys you're thinking about that. Tell us about the book, the title, if you got that yet.
It's been going back and forth. It's a very long title, actually. So let's see if we can get it right here. It's Listening Two by Two, a New Paradigm for Leadership. That's when the magic happens.
Got it.
Nailed
Listening two by two. So tell people about that. Talk a little bit about the concept of listening two by two.
Yeah, it's been a foundation for someone to tell to since we started, obviously out of our relationship. Michael and I are the co-founders, co-CEOs. We call ourselves the Chief Encouragement Officers. And as someone to tell to's grown, I mean, we are kind of the face of the organization. We're using not that we're top-down leaders, we're actually bottom-up leaders because we hope we're leading with humility and understanding. But we would say the face of the organization, and so we do everything together. We do things in pairs, and we make our decisions in pairs. We share a joint email account. It's countercultural in a lot of ways. People sometimes ask, well, who makes the final decision? Well, we both do. That's just how we roll. But it trickles down though to the actual way that we implement our programming side of our work, where all of our team members are sent out in pairs, and all our listening interactions with anybody who reaches out for care and support at someone to tell to, they're always going to be in a same space with two other listeners. And there's a whole host of reasons that we operate that way. I mean, we'll start with the negative one, that we do live in a litigious society at times. And so we meet people in safe environments. We'll, meet people in coffee shops or restaurants. We meet people in their homes. And so it protects both the person who's the someone who's telling us whatever they need to tell us, but it also protects our listeners so that they're protected in the sense that they don't have to carry what they're hearing by themselves, that there's support for each other. They're not breaking confidence when they need to talk something out that they've heard that's really heavy. So there's that aspect, but we've also just found that we're just stronger together.
Yeah.
We think in a world where we do so much apart, why not do things together when, together we're so much stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. So when you're talking about listening two by two, and I love that, and so what would you say before we talk about how it, transfers into your fatherhood, what would be your suggestion or advice for organizations that say, that's not practical, to have some, two people present all the time? And for some people that say, how does that make sense? How can we make that work all the time?
It's a good question. I think we've made it work. We found that it does work. And we've gotten pushback from that because of that, by some who think, well, you could get more accomplished if you were, seeing people individually. You see double the people. You could maybe make double the money. You could whatever it may be. But we have found that there is some accommodations that have to be made that are different, but we've been able to make those accommodations, and it's worked. We've not gotten the people to whom we've listened, who reach out to us over the last almost 10 years, and to our team members who are now part of Someone to Tell It To. No one's gotten pushback from someone who's been listened to about that. That's worked. And as far as making decisions, We just keep in close touch with one another. I mean, our phones are always, a lot of texting, a lot of messages back and forth, a lot of, phone calls or FaceTiming, whatever it needs to be, emails. But we think that we are actually stronger. I mean, it takes some work, it takes some intentionality, but we believe that the organization is stronger because of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we also think that we have survived as an organization because of it. Because if either of us, we'll just use us as an example, have had to do this alone, we may have given up long ago.
Yeah.
Hard work.
Yeah.
Being an entrepreneur is hard work. Being the head of a nonprofit is hard work. Listening to people who really pour out their greatest fears and insecurities and vulnerabilities is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And to not have to do it alone makes the hard work much easier.
Yeah.
So there are always trade-offs, but we have found that we are definitely stronger together.
Yeah. So it sounds like, listening 2 by 2 has been a part of your foundational structure since the inception. All right.
Right.
So you already decided that this is what we're going to do. And so now everything we do, we're going to build it around that.
Yeah.
So we've decided this is who we are. And so I imagine it would be hard for somebody to change, go straight to that. But you've always believed in it. So it was for you to construct everything around that was maybe a little bit easier for you than some, not saying that it was easy, but for you than maybe somebody to change to that.
No, that's a good perception and an understanding it because we created it that way. We can, we don't have as many of those problems, but
Mm-hmm.
we do understand that for many organizations, it might be harder if they've never done it, that we've never done it this way before, and that always gets resistance.
Yeah.
And we understand that, but we're hoping, and we're not saying that everyone has to do, when we do training in listening, and our new book that's coming out is about that, is about, 2 listeners who did it together, just like we do. We understand that not everybody has to do it exactly our way, but if they can pick up some of the principles that we are trying to get across in listening, that we hope, it will be, that it will actually improve cultures in organizations.
Not just that we hope, we honestly know.
Believe that.
I mean, and this is not just us trying to sell books, but I mean, honestly, it's because we've heard it from so many people. I mean, actually, the second half of that title, That's When the Magic Happens, that actually came from an endorsement that we received from a woman who serves on a board, and she was attending these school board meetings, and there was one other board member who was just ruthless. And he was probably kind of like the dad who was screaming at his kid, just loud and just so happens he was also a man, but he was just loud and boisterous, and she didn't know what to do, and he was kind of taking over all of the meetings. And so she, after having learned about our 2 by 2 model, decided that she wanted to take another fellow board member and take him out to coffee. And so they went out and had a cup of coffee together, and she actually used this phrase, "That's when the magic happened," because they stopped, they listened to the man. They found out that a part of the reason that he was being so ruthless was because he had had a major trauma in the school with a grandchild, and there were a lot of lingering effects, and it was coming out in a lot of unhealthy ways because no one ever had listened to him. And so by them listening, he showed up at the next meeting and was a totally different person. And we do believe that this can change cultures, both in work environments and at home. One of our beta readers, our ghost readers of the book before it went public, along with you, Anthony, he wrote to me and he said, "I've been implementing those strategies in my marriage, and it's been already a game changer," which we just love to hear,
Yeah. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this process. I loved reading it, and I think it's an amazing. So anybody can benefit from this book. So there's some awesome principles in there. And what principles? So let's ask a question about the principles in a book. And if you can take a principle from the book and say, like, this is one of the principles that has really benefited me as a father, right? And I take this into my parenthood, my toolbox. What principle from the book do you use as a father the most, you think?
I'd start off by saying, so for those who are listening, we kind of utilize this acronym, LISTEN,
Mm-hmm.
LISTEN, and we break it down. And there's 5 we think, very helpful and practical takeaways that everybody can, 6. But
to make sure they knew that you knew how to spell listen.
So 6 takeaways that people can take. That's also why we do things together, so that we can point out each other's mistakes. But 6 really helpful, practical things. And one of the most practical parts of the acronym that we found is just being interested. The I in listen is just being interested and curious in people. And doing that with our kids, I think, is invaluable. It comes back to a question you had asked earlier of how are you implementing this to like transform culture, and how have you seen it happen? Well, we think that just being interested and curious rather than judgmental makes such a difference with our own kids, of creating a space for them to be able to open up and to share openly and honestly. I mean, you've probably seen this phrase used, but if you don't listen to your kids now when they're young, they're not going to tell you the deeper things when they're older. And so being curious, being interested in what's truly going on, the internal things that don't often get spoken about, and being able to confront those feelings. They could say anything to me, and I'm never gonna to judge them for what they tell me.
Yeah, I'm sure that does things for them that you can't even put into words, or can't even, you can't quantify that.
One of the other letters, T, the T in listen, that stands for in the book for to talk less and embrace silence. I think, as adults, and especially as parents, we feel like we have to have all the wisdom, we have to know everything, we have to be the ones who expound, and sometimes it's more like pontificating, and we just really need to be silent sometimes, a lot of times, and allow our children to express themselves, because we will begin to hear things that we never knew. We'll begin to understand them in ways that we never have before, and we'll see things in them that will impress us, that they know more, are wiser than we realize, and we just need to talk less so that they do have the freedom to talk more and express themselves. And so that's so significant.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. Tell me something that your kids have done that both of you could share something that your kids have done that impressed you.
Yeah, I'll share like a really stark example that I knew we were going to be talking to you today, and it just literally happened to me this week. So our oldest, we have 4 kids, and our oldest, she's 14, and she's just very mature for her age. She just always has been mature, and I know girls mature younger than boys do, generally speaking, but she's always just wise, and she's just very mature. And she experienced something in school just the other day where she was in a class of hers, a French class, where they were kind of assigning seats, and it just so happens that they assigned like 3, and my daughter's white, 3 white girls up front of the class. Yeah. And well, for those who are just listening and not able to see me, but there was an African American girl who took offense at that and openly expressed her thoughts about it to my daughter and to the teacher. And my daughter now has talked about it with us multiple times, about just how bad she feels about it. not just that she certainly didn't have any motives or hidden motives as far as she knew about why. I mean, it wasn't, her seat was assigned to her, but just really trying hard to consider other people's perspectives and why that even was an issue, that this other girl even felt that that was a problem. There's just a level of empathy in her that I'm seeing as she matures that I'm really proud of that. And I hope that continues to rub off on our kids.
That's awesome, because there's always something like that story you shared about the guy who was overwhelming in the meetings, that people could have looked at him. I'm sure there's a lot of people judging him, but there's always something more to the story. There's always something beneath the surface.
Yeah. Absolutely. For me, what impresses my sons the most, my older two sons the most, is how they react to and love their younger brother with his disabilities. Because he's a handful and he can be really challenging at times, and they embrace him and have never shown resentment for the time that he took growing up from them. Maybe, that he took our attention sometimes more than they did, just because of the needs that he has. And they've never shown resentment about that. They've always wanted him to be included. They, go out of their way to make certain that he is part of everything. And in fact, this coming Sunday, not sure when this is going to air, but the few days from now, when in real time, our whole family, my sons and my wife and our three sons and my older two sons' wives and their young children, we're all going to Philadelphia this Sunday afternoon to a Phillies baseball game. My oldest son lives near there, and he got these incredibly cheap, like $12 tickets.
Oh, nice.
And, like, how could you turn this down? So the whole family, all our nuclear family is all going, and they definitely wanted their brother Matthew to be there too.
Awesome.
The seats are pretty high up, and there will be handicap seating for him, but it means that we all can't sit together. So they've decided, they took it upon themselves, we're going to get all the seats together, and they will carry their brother up the steps in order to make sure that he can sit with them, that we all can sit together and don't have to be separate.
You better get that on camera. So Kodak moment for sure.
Right. So and throughout their lives, throughout their growing up and their adulthood, they've just been, tremendous with their brother. And that gives my wife and I absolute joy and gratitude.
It does, man. It gives me chills thinking about him. Like, I feel like it's like a movie scene. You can put that, them carrying him up the steps to watch the game. That's awesome. So I want to ask you too. I have a question for both of you. We're talking about fatherhood in general. Obviously you've experienced a level of growth in your life over time, and we're always growing and evolving. Right now, where you are in your life as a father, what do you feel like is the most important thing for you that you need to work on at this stage? Like, where do you need to improve as a father right now? This is where I'm being comfortable with silence.
It's taken us a long time because there's so few things that we need to work on.
We're trying to make something up here.
Good answer.
I think my personality, I can be very, very driven. I'm kind of like hardwired to be a results person. I just love results. And results don't always happen in a timely fashion on our timetable. So I think just being more patient, I think, with, especially with my kids, just, you can't expect them to be fully mature at their age.
Yeah.
So it just takes patience. They're not going to be a finished product. None of us are.
Right.
So just, I'll say patience.
Patience. I think I could say the same for myself, actually, like patience and continuous reevaluation of like just understanding like that concept and not getting wrapped up in the moment of it, because my son, because my son is not like me, I'm less patient with it. And like, because I'm not like reactive and highly emotional, and I don't, I don't just react to things. My son is that way, and so it like frustrates me. I'm like, get it together, get it together, and I'm like, man, get it back in perspective. Like, there's adults that don't know how to manage their emotions in real time. Like, so how can I really reasonably expect my son to at 9 years old? It's foolish of me.
Yeah.
Mike, still nothing for you, huh? You just got the motto of perfection.
I know I'm getting out of it. I think that particularly, my sons are older. The two oldest ones. And it's kind of like we, in our family, have three parts of our family. In some ways is divided into three parts. One is the five, with our three sons and my wife and I, there's the five of us. There's that whole family. But then, this was them growing up. Then there was the part of the family that with just my wife and I and the older two, with whom we could do certain things that we couldn't do with their brother. And so there were times that it was the four of us who would do some things. And we made a point of doing that with our oldest sons to make sure that they knew that they had our undivided attention. And that times where we would do things without their brother that their brother couldn't do, so that they could know that they were just as important. And then there's the part of the family that my wife and I and our youngest son, who there are things that we just have to do for him that we don't need to do for the others.
Yeah.
And there's all of that. So I think to make certain that there are a number of things that I could certainly improve on. It's to make certain that when our sons need my time, when they need me to listen, when they need me to be present, that I am, that I'm not distracted, that we're in a really, for instance, I just use this example that we're going to this baseball game in Philadelphia on Sunday. Well, Tom and I are in the busiest month of the year for us right now, with our book coming out, with our annual gathering. It would be much easier to know, no, I'm not doing that this month, because I've got too much work to do. I have too many things to take care of for these things that need to happen very quick, very soon. But I'm making the conscious choice, no, this is an opportunity to be with my sons, our sons, to be with our grandchildren too, and all of us together. And especially in this last year and a half with the pandemic, that hasn't happened a lot.
Yeah.
It's to make certain that always spending and sharing the time that is there, that is needed to be with them. That's always something to work on.
Awesome. Yeah. That's good stuff, man. Like, there's always something to work on. That's so true. And I feel like I have to constantly evolve, because my kids are changing faster than I'm changing. So I'm like, okay, what's new today? right, what are we gonna see? And the way you deal with one kid, I can't deal with the same way I deal with the other kid. It's like it's been my biggest challenge as a leader to being a parent. I always say that for sure. Do you guys know? Do you have a release date? Do you have a release date for the book?
January 1st.
January 1st.
But it will be available on Amazon probably by the middle of October, early
Okay.
November, middle of October, early November.
We're hoping to do a lot of pre-sales and things like that. So that's why the push right now to get it to a publisher. It's actually in just a few weeks, and so that so it begin to be available and in print. So there's a lot to do in the next few weeks.
So are people gonna have the option to be able to pre-order it? You said that they could be able to pre-order the book.
It's awesome. There's also going to be an audio book that hasn't been recorded yet, but that's going to happen too.
Okay, how are you gonna do that? How you gonna do the audio? Are you guys gonna do the audio book or do the recording, or are you gonna hire somebody?
We have a team member who is our technician. He's got the equipment. So we have the person who can help to make it real and get it recorded. So the next step is we just haven't even talked about that part,
Okay.
about who's going to do it. I like reading aloud, so I'm very happy to. I'm certainly would be glad to do it if that's the decision, as to take my part in that. Yeah, so that's one of the next steps that has to be determined.
Okay. Because everybody's not, I'm thinking like if I'm writing a book, if I'm doing the audio, I feel like I would want to, but I'm a speaker, I'm not, and like I feel like I would want to do my own audio recording of my book, and because they don't have the same feeling and emotion behind what I wrote that I do. So I want people to hear it from the horse's mouth,
Yeah.
But everybody's not good at that though.
That's where I'm coming from. That's that very same reason. Yeah.
But if you're reading it, but if obviously that's not something you're good at, once you start recording, you sound like a robot, then people might not enjoy listening to your audiobooks. I guess you got to take that into consideration too, of who you are and your personality. I feel like you guys would be great for that.
We'll see what happens.
You'll see. With apprehension on times. But
Tom is better than he gives himself credit for.
Listen, I'm sure if you record your audiobook, me and Mike will both be proud of you. Just remember that.
Appreciate it.
Pressure. But yeah, I'm actually, when we talk, obviously we're on top of the fatherhood, and, I'm thinking about where I want to be better every day. And I'm thinking about even stories that I'm telling you guys, it makes me reflect. And I'm like, man, I wish I could have that back. That moment back, and trying to, sometimes it's hard to not feel that way. I know you can't change it. Like, so these will be my final two questions for you guys. Is there a moment for you that you think about and you're like, man, I wish I could have that moment back and do it again as a father? And then I want to know like your lesson that you would give to any father out there. Like if you could give them one fatherhood lesson, just this is what a tool you need to have as a father. What moment would you take back? What moment would, obviously I can say you can't go back, but what moment would you go back and do it again?
I'm gonna answer that with talking about a larger response than one specific example. I'd say that I would want all dads to hear this, because I need to hear it myself, is just to give yourself grace, that there's moments every day. I mean, there's a lot of instances where we just drop the ball, we fumble the ball. Whether we miss an opportunity in the car after a cross-country meet to have a deep conversation, or we maybe aren't listening as well as we should, or maybe we respond not out of kindness, but out of frustration. We can all think of so many instances like that. And so I think I would want all dads to hear, just to give yourself grace, that today's a new day. Anthony, one of our favorite shows right now, if you've not watched it, you need to, and so do all of your listeners. It's called Ted Lasso.
I've been watching it. It's because you said it before, because you said it on the board meeting. I've been watching it.
So good, right?
What do you think?
I love it, man. It's awesome. I love the scene. I was actually going to use it in my workshop yesterday. I was going to show a clip from it, but I didn't get a chance to. It was the dart in the bar, in the pub, when they're playing darts, and he's talking about being curious.
Yep. Be curious, not judgmental. That's one that we've used today in this podcast. But there's one thing that Ted, the coach, Ted Lasso, says to one of his players, and he uses this image multiple times. It's just be a goldfish, because a goldfish has a 10-second memory. So I think it's not a cop-out on a response to your question, but I think we just need to have a 10-second. It's not that we try to sweep things under the carpet and we're not willing to grow and change, because we always need to do that. But I also think that we could sometimes go into our minds too much that we feel shame again.
Yeah.
So have a 10-second memory, do better.
That's fair, man. That's fair. Absolutely.
I think I mentioned time just in my last answer, and I think there were times when I wish I would have spent more time with my sons. I wish I would have put down my work. I wish I would have said, okay, enough of that is enough for now. I need to play with them. I need to listen to them. And I certainly tried to do that a lot, and I hope that I did. But I think I can look back and think, well, sometimes maybe I didn't as much as I wish I would have. So I would like, to do over, more moments of play with them, especially when they were younger. That would be it.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because that was something that I needed to start doing better. And I heard Shonda Rhimes. I was listening to something Shonda Rhimes said, the creator, how to get away with murder and those shows. Like, I was listening to Shonda Rhimes do an interview, and she said, because she's so busy, right? One of the things that she started doing with her kids was every time her kid said, "Will you play with me?" she did. Like, there's one thing that she just started doing and started implementing, because, her kids say, "Can you play with me?" And she go, "Oh, I'm busy right now. I'm doing this, doing that." She said every time her kid said, "Will you play with me?" Even if it just took 5 minutes, because sometimes a kid will say, "Can you play with me?" And you can play for 5 minutes and they're good. And that's all they wanted. You push the truck around or play a little card game, and they're like, all right, they got their fix.
I'm really glad that you bring that up. That's something we can all take away.
Yeah. So, just something that I've been implementing ever since I heard that. Whenever my kids said, because they say it, I was like, man, and it made me reflect on how many times they said it, and I said, "Oh, not right now." I'm like, man, I got to change that. There's gonna be a time where they don't ask me that anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna want it back. The last thing I'll share is this something similar. I was talking to my friend yesterday with my daughter. It's because we still have those moments. My daughter, she's 8, but she still likes me to pick her up. And she likes me to carry her, and she just likes being wrapped around me and put her arms around me. And there's been multiple times where my daughter said, "Daddy, can you carry me?" And I'm like, "You got legs, girl. Why don't you stop being lazy? Not being lazy and walk over here yourself." And I'm like, man, I got to stop saying that. And because there's going to be a time where she stops asking me to pick her up, stops asking me to carry her. And she's not going to be wrapped around me and hugged up on me. I'm going to want it back. So I got to keep carrying her till she stops asking.
Yeah.
Man, this has been a really good conversation. I really appreciate you guys, and I thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story, and just being willing to be open and honest and have this conversation about fatherhood. I think so many people will benefit from it, and they're going to benefit from your book coming out and any of the books that you have already. and just your organization and what you do and your mission is so valuable, so valuable. And I really appreciate you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here.
Feelings are mutual.
We appreciate you for your for all of that, for the fact that you understand what we do and you believe in it and you support it and are part of it. That really means a lot to us.
Any parting words before we exit this conversation? Anything that's been on your heart and on your mind you just need to get off your chest? This is the space for it.
I just would like to say thank you for doing this, and thank you for talking about fathers, because I just always felt that culturally, fathers have been often looked at as sort of second-class parents, that they're more peripheral, maybe less involved, less close to their children than most mothers are. And I think that's something I've, from the moment I knew that I was going to be a father, I wanted that to be different. I didn't want that to be the case. I didn't want to be a peripheral father, second class, or less important, less than. And the fact is that we hear people, in a lot of the listening that we do, we have heard so many people who have had what we call daddy issues, that their fathers were not present, their fathers were abusive, their fathers were cold, their fathers were demanding or mean, their fathers were just not a warm and happy part of their lives. And that affects people for the rest of their lives. And we would like fathers to understand that, so that we have permission and have a charge to not allow ourselves to be second class, to be peripheral, but to be an equal and active part of our children's lives.
I like that. I do think that, because that perception is definitely out there. What about you, Tom? Parting words.
I'm gonna actually end with a quote. It comes from an author named John Eldridge. Mm-hmm. He's written extensively about fatherhood, but I love this quote, and I actually have this in a frame at my house. And he said, "I'm going to make fathering very simple. Answer your child's question. Answer, yes, you have what it takes, or yes, you are lovely. Answer it 1,000 times in 1,000 ways over the course of your son or daughter's life, and you will have done your job. You will have offered the best gift a father can give." Mm. And I think it just comes back to the same message we had shared earlier, just about being proud of our kids.
Yeah.
So be proud.
Be proud, because they do so many great things. And I think as parents, we can tend to highlight the negative.
Yep.
And that's what they hear, and that's what sticks with them.
Yep.
So yeah, I think we all need that message. So thank you. And people are benefiting, not just fathers. I just had a friend text me, an old friend that I grew up with, who's a mom. She said, "I just finished listening to some of your podcasts this morning, and it's really helping me." And so it's not just for fathers. We're talking about parenting in general, but obviously fatherhood. So,
well, just to affirm you are an excellent interviewer.
Yeah,
we've been on a lot of programs over the years, and you just have a way. You're very, very calming presence, but you ask very thoughtful questions. So well done.
Thank you.
You're very trustworthy, and you make it easy for us to be vulnerable.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you for sharing that. And I really know, like I said, the listeners are going to find value in this. And if they listen, they are truly listening. They get some good nuggets from you guys. And I'm looking forward to see what you guys do in the future, and look forward to working with you, collaborating. And I'm sure we'll do this again.
We'd love to.
Love to.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And this was, we'll see what episode we're going to do this on. We'll talk about it. And but you're listening to The Molds That Make Fatherhood. Thank you for listening. and keep coming back. We're going to keep doing this and helping fathers, helping parents. And if you got any suggestions, hit me up. We'll talk about them. We'll talk about anything that has to do with fatherhood. Thanks for listening.